One of my favourite things about doing this stupid thing is reading your comments, and one comment that I've seen coming up again and again on my Who Will Robert Strong Fight video is the subject of this video, the idea that the High Sparrow doesn't want to win the trial. The first 4 times someone commented this I thought, maybe, but the 5th time I thought, a lot of people are saying this, maybe I should do a video on it. So here I am, doing a video on it. The comments raised 2 main reasons why winning the trial would actually be bad for the High Sparrow. Both come from the idea that if Cersei is convicted of the crime she is accused of, it will undermine Tommen, with multiple people pointing out that if Cersei loses, it will mean Tommen will be proven in the eyes of the faithful to be a bastard born of incest. This will mean that his reign will be declared illegitimate, which 1 would mean all his decrees are retroactively revoked, including the one rearming the faith militant, and 2 would mean that with him and also Myrcella ruled out the succession, the R'hllor-worshipping 7-burning Stannis would become the rightful king. Neither of these outcomes are things the High Sparrow wants. Now, my first reaction on seeing this theory was, is Cersei actually on trial for incest? The answer is yes, but there's a reason I couldn't remember. When the High Sparrow interviews Cersei, she confesses to sleeping with Lancel Lannister and all 3 Kettleblacks. However, she denies sending Osney Kettleblack to kill the previous High Septon, telling him to falsely accuse Margaery of adultery, conspiring to murder Robert, and that her children are bastards born of incest and adultery. The High Sparrow says that there will need to be a trial for the accusations she denies, though he does not specify which ones. It's only when Kevan visits her later that the rap sheet is laid out in full: regicide, deicide, incest, and high treason. Now, there's the possibility that we could wrangle it so the incest she is accused of could be with Lancel, say, Jaime is never actually mentioned, or that it only happened after Robert's death or after the birth of her children. In that conversation, Kevan also says that win or lose, Cersei will go back to Casterly Rock and he will serve as Tommen's regent until he comes of age, which is a little optimistic if Cersei losing would mean that Tommen would be seen as a bastard born of incest. Kevan acknowledges the issue in the epilogue when he tells Mace Tyrell that if Cersei is found guilty, the legitimacy of her children will be called into question, which is kind of an understatement. Irrespective of Kevan not seeming to fully grasp the stakes of the trial though, it does seem as if Cersei will be on trial for incest, and that this is expected to impact Tommen's legitimacy. Perhaps the High Sparrow hoped that in the trial he proposed, the 7-strong court could find Cersei innocent on this charge but guilty of the others. But that's unlikely in a trial by combat, which is more of an all-or-nothing affair. The High Sparrow could drop the charge of incest prior to the trial, now that he knows it's going to be by combat, but by the time of the epilogue of Dance, Cersei has already chosen her champion, but incest is still on the charge sheet. What all this highlights, though, is the core reason why I was initially skeptical about the idea that the High Sparrow wants to lose the trial. Because if he was really worried about delegitimizing Tommen, why include the incest charge at all? He's clearly reluctant to do it. In his interview with Cersei, he prefaces the accusation with, "There are some who say," implying that he's not convinced by it, and when Cersei denies it, he says, "Good," and has a go at Stannis, which Cersei finds almost reassuring. It's not like there's a huge groundswell of popular belief in the charge either. When Cersei does her walk of shame, some people reference her incest, but most of them attack her as a whore or sinner. There's not really any evidence for the claim either, unlike with the deicide and regicide where the High Sparrow has the testimony of Osney Kettleblack and Lancel Lannister. All he has to go on for the incest is presumably Stannis' letter, which doesn't even point out the whole blonde/black hair evidence, which itself would only point towards Cersei sleeping around, not necessarily who with. So the High Sparrow doesn't have any real reason to accuse Cersei of incest. He doesn't seem to believe it himself, he doesn't have any good evidence for it, we don't see any external pressure on him to do it, and as my commenters pointed out, if Cersei is found guilty it will cause him problems, pretty massive ones. Even if he intended to have her found innocent, or to drop the charge ahead of trial, it's still not great for Tommen's legitimacy to have this particular dirty laundry aired in public, especially if you have to drop the charge rather than having Cersei found innocent, which would be necessary in the event of a trial by combat, which the High Sparrow would probably guess is Cersei's most likely option. Before going further, we should probably have a look at the High Sparrow's motivation, as that will be crucial in determining whether he wants to win or lose the trial. Here we run into a bit of difficulty. On one hand, the High Sparrow could not be clear about what he wants. He says he is unhappy about how the war has affected the faith. Septs have been burned down, priests raped and killed. He also wants to help the poor, who have lost their homes in the war and are starving, and he has disdain for the opulence and extravagance of the most devout, selling his crown and all the faith's gold to feed the poor. His philosophy is best summed up in his conversation with Cersei about the money the crown owes the faith, which he describes as gold that could feed the hungry and rebuild 1,000 septs. Yet despite this populist religious rhetoric, he's capable of working on another level, which Cersei shows by asking him the question, is it gold you want? Or do you want these dusty lords of Magor set aside? The High Sparrow picks the latter, choosing the rearming of the faith militant over the prospect of all that cash. Now you can quite easily say that this is all still with the end goal of feeding the poor and restoring the faith. That money is debt after all, which the crown probably has no means of actually repaying, and the faith militant can be used as a tool to extract concessions. What this does prove though is that the High Sparrow is a canny political operator. He's willing to do horse trading to achieve his ends. He shows this in his conversations with Cersei. In the first one, where he plants the idea of undoing Maegor's laws for Cersei to pick up on. Funnily enough, she thinks it's the other way around. He also withholds his blessing from Tommen in order to extract concession. In the second conversation, he acts as though nothing is wrong when leading Cersei into the Sept, only to reveal that he's been questioning Osney and knows what she did. Finally, when Cersei goes to confess to him in her first chapter of Dance, she launches into the pious spiel that so enchanted the Septors, but the High Sparrow is uninterested, interrupting her so she can get to the point. None of this is to say that the High Sparrow is a rock-hard atheist, or even that he is being insincere about his motivations. Only that he is smart, and that he thinks several moves ahead, that he's not blinded by religious fervour in the same way that many of his allies are. He's unlikely to rely on the intervention of the gods to solve his messy temporal problems for him. Indeed, when Cersei finds he's battered Osney around, she stammers about the mother's mercy, but the High Sparrow draws a clear line between the next life, when Osney will get his mercy, and this one, where it's necessary to do a little bit of torturing. All this means that we cannot simply say that the High Sparrow is making dumb decisions because he's blinded by religious zealotry. It's not like he's going to cast Tommen out and assume that just because the gods are on his side, everything will be alright. If he's accusing Cersei of incest, it must be because he reckons it's worth it. Let's return to the points raised by my lovely commenters, and go into a bit more detail. In particular, I think the first point, that if Tommen is declared illegitimate then his decrees will be null and void, is not necessarily a deal breaker for the High Sparrow. After all, Maegor was an illegitimate usurper who never had any justifiable claim to the throne and who was succeeded by his enemies, yet his decrees are still in force 250 years and a dynastic change later, because they're politically expedient. Jaehaerys and his successors benefited from the faith militant being disarmed, so they didn't undo Maegor's laws. Similarly, if Tommen is cast out, who is going to tap the High Sparrow on the shoulder and regretfully inform him that his massive army is now illegal and needs to disband? And if someone sucks up the courage to do so, how likely is anyone to listen? The High Sparrow has his army now, made up of trained knights and peasant rabble alike, and so he has a de facto power, regardless of what some legal technicality says otherwise. However, the second point is a lot harder to argue against. If Tommen and Myrcella are ruled out of the succession, Stannis and Shireen become the only Baratheons left. It's not like just because Stannis legally should be king, everyone will shrug their shoulders and say, well, I guess he's king now, but they would have no obvious claimant of their own to rally around. There would be a few people probably who would switch to Stannis if Tommen was declared illegitimate, but he's unpopular, miles away, and pretty weak. With the viable Baratheon dynasty effectively extinguished, there would be many lords of the realm who might fancy a stab at claiming the throne for themselves, following the precedent that Robert Baratheon set 20 years earlier. Just off the top of my head, Mace Tyrell is probably best placed to give it a go, and certainly ambitious enough. But with nobody any more legitimate than anyone else, the kingdom might descend into anarchy, with everyone and their mum putting forward their claim to the throne via some obscure Targaryen connection, or with some claimed Baratheon bastard. The High Sparrow wouldn't want this, surely, as this would mean more war, more despoiled septs, and more starving commoners. So purposely losing is presumably preferable to that. Yet the problem I had with this idea from the start remains. It just seems like such a damaging way to solve a problem that you created for yourself completely unnecessarily. If the High Sparrow loses the trial, then he has made Cersei into an enemy for life and has to let her go. Sure, Kevin thinks she's been defanged, but he's probably wrong, and she's still the Lady of Casterly Rock, in charge of the wealthiest house in the kingdoms, still with a massive army. Cersei is too dangerous to be left alive, and the High Sparrow has to know she hates him and all of his ilk with a burning rage now she's been forced to do the walk of shame. As I said before, the others may be taken in by a false conversion, but the High Sparrow is not so gullible. When you contrast this against the fact that all he needed to do to avoid this situation was not to include the incest charge on the rap sheet, as the crimes of regicide and deicide are already more than enough to do her in, and him losing on purpose seems an incredibly costly way to avoid something which he could have avoided completely for free. So we're left in a bit of a pickle. In our current understanding, the High Sparrow doesn't want Tommen to be delegitimized, yet his actions are in service of delegitimizing Tommen. This has to be reconciled somehow. My commenters do so by proposing that his actions might not be what they appear, that he may actually want to lose a trial, but that raises the problems that we've just gone through. There is another possibility, though, that we have missed something from his motives. He doesn't want Stannis to win, and he's delegitimizing Tommen. But as he tells Cersei when explaining why he isn't proclaiming Tommen king, the realm is full of kings. For the faith to exalt one above the rest, we must be certain. Now, as well as being another example of undermining Tommen, this is a hell of a line for our theory. Because at the time the High Sparrow says this, there are 3 kings in the realm. There's Tommen, there's Stannis, and there's Euron. Stannis, as we've already established, is a heathen actively hostile to the faith of the Seven, a fact which the High Sparrow recognises, while Euron is a human-sacrificing, old-way, drowned god-worshipping Ironborn, and anyway he hasn't claimed the Iron Throne and the High Sparrow might not even know he's won the King's Moot yet. Obviously the faith should not need to think too hard before coming to a conclusion on which king is the correct one. Cersei doesn't challenge him on this, but we should. What other king might the High Sparrow be supporting, which might explain why he's willing to delegitimize Tommen? Well, the answer is the only other king around, Aegon VI, or young Griff. The main evidence for this is that everything the High Sparrow is doing serves Aegon's cause. The most obvious bit is the fact that he is simultaneously taking down the government in King's Landing while amassing a force of troops who will have absolutely no truck with Stannis' lot. Varys lays out the grand Aegon strategy, which is to destabilise Westeros so that when Aegon arrives he'll be welcomed as a saviour, and there'll be little resistance to him. The most destabilising force at the moment in the kingdom is the Sparrow movement. Moreover, there are more specific aspects to the High Sparrow's actions, most notably the fact that he is delaying the trials of Margaery and Cersei for some unknown reason. Indeed, when Cersei asks the Septors about whether Margaery has been tried yet, one starts to explain but is cut off by the other. There's obviously something fishy going on. And perhaps we can see the reason. When Margaery is imprisoned, Mace Tyrell all but abandons the siege of Storm's End and marches back to the capital, where he refuses to leave until Margaery's innocence is proven. Conveniently, this leaves just the famished defenders of Storm's End and a token force led by Mathis Rowan to resist Aegon's landing. It's possible that the Tyrells could be in on it too. After all, the Sparrows hand over Margaery to them, and the cut-off explanation the Septors give includes a reference to Margaery's brother, which is interesting given Loras is supposedly injured, Garland is preparing a reconquest of the Shield Islands, and Willis is presumably still in Highgarden. What relevance could one of them have to Margaery's trial, and why is it important that Cersei not be told it? Randall Tarley's involvement in this small council in the epilogue can read like someone not used to politicking trying too hard to show how much he doesn't like Aegon. His only intervention is to repeatedly question whether Aegon is Aegon, whether John Connington is John Connington, and even whether the Golden Company is the Golden Company. Perhaps the Tyrells or the Tarleys are those much discussed friends in the Reach, who will supposedly support Aegon. That's kind of a sidetrack though, because there's more to the potential High Sparrow-Aegon alliance. The High Sparrow acts like he's being sponsored to reference Targaryen kings. He talks about Maegor, of course, but also Jaehaerys the Conciliator several times, and references Aegon the Conqueror. Specifically how when he invaded, the High Septon at the time consulted with the gods and proclaimed Aegon king. A very topical thing to be talking about. The most relevant Targaryen king, however, goes unmentioned, except by Cersei, who thinks about Baelor the Blessed. Baelor is probably top of the High Sparrow's ranking of kings, loving both the small folk and the gods, and locking up his sisters. Considering the High Sparrow's motives, his preoccupation with sexual morality and his somewhat less than modern views on women, this guy is the ideal king to the High Sparrow. He's especially incensed by the fact that the execution of Ned Stark took place on the Great Sept of Baelor, defiling the holy place set up by that most holy of kings, even if the execution is of a smelly heathen northerner. Side note, reading how the High Sparrow is hung up on the fact that Ned got executed made me wonder for a second if that whole Howland Reed equals High Sparrow theory is really so crazy. But it is, right? Right? Anyway, back to the theory. As well as being a stand for the Targaryen kings in general, if Varys or someone else pitched the Aegon prospectus to the High Sparrow, as he did to Kevin, the High Sparrow would find a lot to like. Aegon is supposed to be down to earth, understanding of the small folk, and educated in the ways of the faith. He's also helpfully neither a child nor a heathen. There's more. Because of the High Sparrow's low opinion of women and his efforts to prove his opinions by trying possibly Margaery and definitely Cersei for all manner of crimes, he's actively making it harder for a female ruler like Daenerys to get support, which will help Aegon if Dany ever belatedly shows up. This works whether or not the plan for Aegon to marry Dany was serious and still on at this point. It would weaken support for Dany and give Aegon more power, which his backers would want. And finally, what is a sparrow, if not a little bird? I didn't come up with that one, unfortunately. I got it from an old forum post arguing that the High Sparrow is Varys in a glamour, an idea so tinfoil that even the OP abandoned it. But it's still interesting, isn't it? Now, the High Sparrow's stated motivation of helping the poor and protecting the faith can still be 100% genuine and his driving motive. I think of the High Sparrow not as a puppet of Varys and Illyrio, but an ally, siding with them because they are best placed to get him what he wants. This is mainly a way of justifying what Varys tells Kevin, that if left to rule well, Kevin might have made peace for the Tyrells and the faith, which wouldn't make sense if the High Sparrow was Varys' puppet. But after all, it makes sense that the High Sparrow would be independent. His power base is independent of Varys and unique to him. Varys can't simply bump off the High Sparrow and hope to maintain the support of the faithful. When exactly the High Sparrow got on board is up for debate. Was it before or after his elevation to the Holy See? Before or after the Sparrow movement started? Who knows? The long and short of this theory is that the best justification for the High Sparrow's actions, namely putting Cersei on trial for incest and thus delegitimizing Tommen, while knowing that doing so would empower Stannis and likely plunge the realm into more anarchy, is not that he intends to lose the trial with all the downsides that would come with it, nor that he simply kind of forgot that he didn't need to put Cersei on trial for incest specifically, but that he wants to win the trial. He wants to delegitimize Tommen, so that a better, stronger king who is more aligned with his values and better placed to enact them can ascend to the throne. That's it for this theory. I didn't find a place to mention the weird fact that in Cersei 6 the High Sparrow speaks exclusively in the first person plural, as in saying we and our, but then in Cersei 10 he speaks normally with I and my. Don't know what significance that has. Let me know in the comments. Also let me know if I've successfully convinced you that the High Sparrow wants to win his trial, or alternatively whether there's another argument against that I missed. Thanks to all the commenters whose comments inspired this video. You can all have 2 arbitrary meaningless points. Next video I think will be me ranking every Kingsguard, all 110 plus of them. Because why not, eh? Until then, thanks for watching, and goodbye.